Again, my name is Frank Corrao. I am a digital marketing manager at Active Web Group. Active Web Group is a full-service digital marketing firm in Hauppauge, New York. Today, we're going to be talking about the foundations and successful tips of internet marketing or digital marketing. This is a 360 presentation, so we touch a little bit on everything. And it's also a very, what I call a deep water presentation. So we're going to talk about just about every single facet, nuance. There's a lot here, a lot of information to take in. If you have any questions, again, I'll gladly answer them at the end. Okay, so in the beginning, you started out, you had traditional marketing. I call it traditional versus tangible. So tangible versus intangible marketing. Tangible marketing meaning mailers, flyers, postcards, billboards, even radio to a degree, radio and TV. Digital marketing, on the other hand, is anything you see on your computer screen, your tablet, or your mobile device. Now, traditional marketing, it has limited audiences. You get less information. The price and the cost to advertise traditionally is high. So you're paying for print, you're paying for a billboard, you're paying to get your ad in a newspaper. The communication is delayed, and of course, the scope is very limited. I have to then assume that the user is going to do something like type in www.activewebgroup.com instead of just clicking on it. So there's more of an ask on the consumer side. Versus digital marketing, it could be low cost. You could pick and choose your budget to a degree. There's a wide range of platforms or resources from email marketing, SEO, pay-per-click onwards, which we'll get into. The conversion rate can be controlled. So the consumer coming in and their ability to fill out a form or buy a product or service on your website, that can be controlled to a large extent. You have measurable and quantifiable success, which is the biggest takeaway of all this. If I send out a mailer, it might be hard to quantify or qualify my success. Whereas if I'm doing a digital marketing piece, it's a lot easier for me to calculate ROI, return on investment. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about here is the two different sites we have. And again, we're going to crawl here before we walk. So we have a lead generation site versus an e-commerce website. And what do I mean by that is I mean goals. So when I look at my website, essentially I'm basing on goals. Filling out forms. So a lead generation site is a form submission site, essentially. Somebody who's going to request a quote, contact you for additional information on your product or service. That's measured by clicks and calls. So people clicking on your form submission, calling your phone directly, clicking on the little call now button at the top of your website. Sessions. So how many people visit your website and how many times they visit. And then we measure that all in the cost per lead. So if I have a digital marketing ad that I'm running, what I do is I calculate the spend allocation to get me the cost per lead. Now with an e-commerce site is measured the same but differently. Of course, you have form submissions and things like that, but I always say that an e-commerce site is relatively simple. It's complex on the back end, of course, and getting set up. Logistically, but the goal is the same. The goal is to get people to buy your product. There are products on your website you want them to purchase. So you're worried about things like conversion rate, shopping cart abandonment, what their average order value are, and the lifetime value of a customer on your website. So these are things you want to think about as you consider your digital approach, whether you're a lead generation site or an e-commerce website. Now, I've been talking about KPIs, which are your key performance indicators. These are measurable goals. These are measurable factors that tie into your goals. As I said, if your goal is to get people to purchase products on your website, you got to consider your KPIs, your key performance indicators. As I said earlier, that might be your average order value. So knowing your key performance indicators are important. Data. Okay, this is the biggest takeaway of the entire presentation here, and I'm going to dive deeper into it. But having measurable data is single-handedly the most important element of digital marketing. So being able to look at, quantify, and qualify the data on the back end of your website is, again, the most important part of all of this. You could readily know which platform is generating the most leads, getting you the most sales by having the appropriate data pool. Now, there are things in the data pool that you could get. There's Google Analytics, and there's also Google Tag Manager. Google Tag Manager is an extended version of Google Analytics, where I would essentially put my goals in there, and they would trigger and fire off as as a user was journeying throughout the site. I would learn more about that user journey over time, and knowing my user journey, I'd be able to make changes to my website and my digital marketing approach through that data. I'm going to get into that a little later too. Now, important metrics here. We have sessions and users. So these are the amount of traffic essentially going to the website. Sessions, users, let's start with users. Users are if I was to visit activewebgroup.com, and the sessions behind it are how many times I might have visited activewebgroup.com. Again, new and returning visitors, so repeat visitors both and newly acquired visitors. Bounce rate. So if I am to go to a website, let's say I'm to click on an ad, and this has probably happened to all of you. I'm clicking on a pay-per-click ad that I've seen in Google, or I've gotten retargeted on a different website. I clicked on that ad, and it wasn't, the information there wasn't about the ad. So it said, we are a full service landscaping company. And I clicked on the ad, and it was about planting trees. So having the appropriate information that the user is being served based on what their needs are, and based on your ad set is important. That is something that could get a high bounce rate. So people leaving your website. Average page load time. I'm going to get deeper into this, but slow sites effect has a direct correlation on both bounce rate, traffic, and rankability. Overall paid versus organic sessions. So organic meaning SEO, my search engine optimization. Who is organically going to my website based on whatever keywords or information they're placing in the search, versus paid session, which is an ad spend. So I paid 20 cents per click on the keyword Long Island SEO, for example. Top landing pages. What are your website's most relevant pages that a user is visiting? How is a user most likely going to enter your website? Are they going to go through the homepage, which is something we traditionally see? Is an about page anchored to the SERPs or the search engines, and it's being ranked and indexed above all the other pages, and that's how a user is entering the website. So knowing your top landing pages is important. If you were to run something like a pay-per-click ad and you had a specific landing page for that, I would expect to see that in your top 5 landing pages. Okay, what are channels? Channels are essentially your platforms, as I said. So before we were talking about direct mail and billboard and radio, etc. Very similar idea. So what are channels or platforms? You have your direct. That's a user going and visiting the www.com directly. So I'm in my taskbar in Google, and I'm typing in activewebgroup.com. I'm already familiar with activewebgroup.com at that point because I know the brand name and I know the URL. Organic. Organic is your SEO or your search. So that is users coming into your website through a generalized search. I'm searching for digital marketing firms, and Active Web Group came up number 1 or 2 in the SERPs, in the search engines. A paid spend, pay-per-click advertising. So this could be both on social media, but generally it's done through Google, MSN, Bing. This is putting an ad or a spend allocation behind an ad, both either in display, so it's something that's seen in the search, or a visual display ad, which I'm going to get into all that later. Social media. Social media could be organic, which again, it's just posting regularly in a certain timed interval, or it could be a paid spend allocation, but your general platforms here are Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. Referral. So referral traffic comes from another website. And your email marketing. So I did an email blast on landscaping, and I got X users to come in through my, to visit my site from there. I had a unique landing page, and I also had a tracking code implemented into the URL itself. So these are your channels. Okay, so now when you're considering digital marketing based on your all your platforms, there's really 4 main steps here, and the whole process of it is I call it 360 because you start one place and then you loop around again. So it's really rinse and repeat. Now, the first step, as I said, is you want to assess your goals. My website is a lead generation website, not an e-commerce website, as I said. So it's a lead generation website, and I mow lawns. So my goal is to get people who have property, to get them to fill out a form so I can give them a call and try and mow their lawn. Step 2 is your digital marketing strategy. I'm going to dive further down into this. As I said, it's a big presentation, but your digital marketing strategy here are what platforms, as we previously discussed, am I going to use to obtain my goals? So I am going to write 3 pages of content a month to try to get ranked in the search engines or the SERPs. I'm also going to have an email marketing or a nurture campaign that I'm going to interject, and I'm also going to have a small pay-per-click strategy. So I'm touching each cornerstone to a degree, and that's how I'm reaching my target consumer over time. And then step 3 is the execution of that. So as I said, step 2, I assessed my goals and I said what I'm going to do. So now I'm going to get to task and I'm going to start writing that content, have that content optimized. I'm going to make sure that I'm sending out 2 cohesive emails a month. And I'm also watching my spend allocation on pay-per-click, and I'm having a proper strategy, and I'm making changes to the pay-per-click strategy and bid allocation as things progress. Now with pay-per-click, going to dive deeper here, but let's say it's the spring, summertime, people are mowing their lawns heavy, right? That also means my competition is showing up heavy. So they're spending more on ads. So do I want to spend more to acquire a user? Is it worth for me to spend 50 cents instead of 20 cents a click on lawn mowing near me as a key term? Those are things you're going to have to ask yourself based on your ROI that you're going to calculate. But step 3 here is execution of the original parameters that I set forth. And then again, after you execute, it's important to set benchmarks for success. So I like to break up tasks. You can't do 5 things 10%. It's important to do one thing 110%, move on and do the next task. So if I'm going to set 2 emails up, I want to make sure those are the best emails I possibly can do, rather than send out 5 garbage emails. And you have to give this stuff time. People think that I'm gonna rank for lawn care right away. You know, it takes time for these things. You have to be consistent about anything in life, and that includes digital marketing. And step 4 is my favorite. It's analytics and it's measurable data. As a digital marketer, having appropriate analytics and be able to measure that is important. So if I have ran all 3 or 4 campaigns for a month, we talked about email, SEO, pay-per-click, let's throw organic social media in there for fun. I've ran all 4 of these campaigns cohesively together for 3 months now consecutively. I'm going to go look back at my quantifiable data, and I'm going to say, okay, well, my lead horse here is SEO. I see most of my users are visiting the site organically, right? So now it's just a matter of dollars and cents. Do I want to up my game with SEO, spend a couple more dollars, write more content, etc.? That's man hours. Or do I see another platform being a real workhorse for me? You may find that you're getting a lot of traffic from one channel. Like I'm getting a lot of traffic from email, but it's not converting. I could tell that based on my analytics that's set up properly in the back end of my website, right? They're not converting. However, I do notice I don't get as many users from social media, my organic social media, but the users that do visit my website are quality, they're calling, they're engaged, and they convert. So knowing and being able to analyze this data appropriately is one of the most important parts, as I said. Okay, so now we talked about all of that, getting set up for success. How do I define my goals? What kind of website do I have? And a brief overview of setting up a marketing strategy. We're going to dive deeper now into platforms. Okay, so as I said, you have your digital strategy, and then you have all your platforms. So from branding is really your brand and your messaging. So anything from your logo, your colors, the way your images fall on the website. My images are gray and they have an orange hue to them, right? That is part of your brand messaging or strategy, right? And then you have things like your email marketing. So you're sending out emails to various audiences. I'm sending out a thank you email automatically when someone fills out my form on the website interested in landscaping or getting their lawn mowed. Through that, I define the user journey. So they've clicked and engaged with my website doing X. Over time, I'm segmenting that list. So I know a user who has signed up on my website is now only interested in getting his yard sprayed for pesticides, right? So if that's the case, I'm then nurturing him in that capacity. Whereas if someone is more interested in getting their lawn cut, I could put them into a different basket and nurture them different, right? So keeping that in mind, and then having cornerstone promotions is important, but not every email should be a nurture or a promotional based email, and I'm going to get into that later. Optimization, so that's your SEO, and that goes hand in hand with your content marketing. So you're not writing copy and putting things on a website just to do it. You're doing it with intention and purpose, and that purpose is to rank for terms that you know your user is searching to find a product or service, right? You're looking at that. You're looking at the key terms. You're seeing what ranks, what the difficulty of a key term is, and if it's feasible to get to the top of the search within X period. As I said, it's SEO. Doing all these things is not a set it and forget it proposition. You're always attacking this. This is always a strategy you're doing monthly. And it's also not something that happens overnight. Success doesn't happen overnight with a lot of this stuff. You have to be diligent and you have to be consistent. And that includes things like the content on your website, blogs, as well as some back-end elements like titles, tags, metadata, etc. Content marketing, again, going hand in hand with the optimization. So that's your blogs, things on your website, having some, that could even be some of your pay-per-click elements. And then your social platforms, which we have here, which is, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. More on that later. Okay, so starting with your brand. Again, your brand is your logo. It's your, it's the way a user or a potential prospect engages with your overall brand, right? There are certain colors that connote certain things based on like trust and loyalty. Knowing this, orange, for example, let's take orange. Orange is a more playful color. So something like Nickelodeon is orange, right? That's a fun, playful spirit, kind of like this slide here. So knowing what messaging you want to convey is important in creating a logo. And then the same is true throughout your website, throughout your brand. Having consistency there, showing value, being within your tagline and your mission statement. So it's important to have a solid tagline. A tagline is just 1 to 3 words that describe your product or service that you'd put below your logo. And then your mission statement is a more detailed, in-depth dive at why you exist in the marketplace. And it's important to have these things. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is your website overall. So having a good, clean, responsive website is important. What do I mean by a responsive website? What I mean is that it looks great and it's readable on all devices across platform, whether I'm looking on the 13-inch laptop, I'm looking at a 27-inch monitor, or I'm looking at my small phone. Having cohesive and important information that's at the top of the page is important. So here you'll see a get started button. You'll see important links. You might see a phone number way above up top on the website. So a user could click if they're on a mobile device and call you direct. And also having the key components of why the website exists or why you exist in the marketplace is important. So having clean, concise messaging is important. You can see how that works from a brand strategy standpoint. Here, this website is using yellow to tie in its important key components and messaging that it's pulled from the logo. So get started, any CTA or call to action, they're using that color. A good example too would be Active Web Group, who does this with orange. So having a color scheme in mind and using that color consistently to get your message or your point of view across, at the end of the day, one gives you a clean, cohesive brand, but at the other end of the spectrum helps sell. Okay, email marketing. So your email marketing is directly tied to your website. As I said, from a user journey, I went and filled out a form on the website. So I filled out a form, and from there, I ended up getting an email within 24 hours. That's no mistake. Having a set time frame to send out a thank you email or a thank you for subscribing email, one that helps double verify a list. You want to stay away from spam traps, and you don't want to get a high spam rate because you might get kicked off your email client or magnet. But also it helps that open up that communication and that dialogue, right? leads go cold quickly, especially when you're talking about marketing with the intent of engaging or nurturing somebody. So the sooner you can reach out to them or grab a touch point is important. The same is true for an e-commerce website. Having appropriate user experience there is vital. So for me, if I am buying a product online, I expect to get a your order is on its way, thank you for purchasing email. I then expect to get an estimated time of delivery. And then over time, I'm going to take that and probably be put into another basket, right? Where I'm going to then be nurtured for future promotions. So they're running a 4th of July sale, 25% off site-wide, right? Those things don't happen in a vacuum. Getting set up on a strategic timeline from an email marketing perspective is important. And also not sending out emails that are just promotional all the time is vital. So I like to say every 3rd email is a promotional one. But this could be every 5th email or every 4th email, depends on your bandwidth for execution. Again, do something 110%, don't do 10 things 10%. But you want to make sure that whatever you're doing isn't just a frivolous promotional effort. It's important to provide tangible information to the end user. It helps them trust your brand, going back to brand, and it gets a consumer to become loyal. So sending out a white paper, sending out a newsletter, those things are great, and they're great for engagement. And they're not necessarily always selling something. So keeping that in mind is important. Okay, SEO, which happens to be one of my favorites here. So SEO, or search engine optimization, is how a user will visit your site organically from a search query. So that search could happen in something like Google, of course, which is the #1 search engine in the world. But you have MSN, you have Bing, which is owned by Microsoft. You have Yahoo, you have DuckDuckGo, which is another one. There are plenty of search engines out there. But one, understanding the algorithm behind it, and 2, understanding and having a strategy for what I call dominating the search is important as well. So you're not going to rank overnight for, let's say I want to rank for lawn care. I have to set forth an appropriate strategy. So I'm going to make sure the back end of my website is optimized and ready to be ranked. If I build a brand new pretty website that's got all the bells and whistles that I talked about earlier, it's got CTAs above the fold or above the scroll, it has a phone number to click, it's responsive on a mobile device, that still does not mean the website is optimized and ready to rank out the box. There are things that have to be done. A lot of web developers forget about this. Another thing that I see happen is you'll have an old website and then you'll go to build a new website, but your web developer or your web team or your team internally won't think about or consider the SEO that already exists on your old website. Older websites do have what they call a domain authority. And what that is it's essentially boiling it down, it's the internet or the search, it's Google saying, hey, this is a great website. It's been here for a long time. A lot of people visit it. I'm going to rank it ahead of a lot of these newer websites because it has a lot of old anchored information. So having a higher domain authority is important. If you have a previous website that had a good domain authority and you had a website that had a lot of content, right, but then you didn't translate all that great SEO onto your new website, tremendous miss. And I've seen it happen time and time again. So considering where you're at currently from a ranking standpoint and knowing where you need to go. So this way, when a user searches for, let's say, lawn care, you come up on the first page of Google, which is where you want to be. That is what you want to do. Now, there's a long tail strategy that's involved there. It's not, again, it's not a set it and forget it proposition, but being able to grab your audience organically off a search that they performed is the best possible thing. The best way to get a user and the best way to get a user to engage and buy. Okay, now with that being said, a lot of times in my strategy here, I will say that, okay, we're not currently ranking for lawn care. We're on page 15. No one's clicking to page 15 in Google to come find me. If you're not 1, 2, or 3, or maybe somewhere on the first page, you're probably not getting clicked on, which will have a direct correlation and impact on your traffic and your bottom line. But while you're working on your strategy to rank and your content marketing, so eventually over time you can dominate the search, what I usually say is, hey, maybe you should think about a pay-per-click or a PPC allocation, a spend here. So this way you're bridging that gap, right? Here's a good example of sharetribe.com, which is a platform. Now, if you take that, you have, let's say, I'm going to put $500 a month on build a marketplace, which is a key term that I have here. So if I put a couple dollars towards that, I'm going to appear on the top of the search alongside my competition. I'm just paying to play. Organically, your only cost execution is in the work that you do. So writing content, optimizing that content, making sure my title tags, my metadata, and the backend is proper. And Google gives me a thumbs up, right? With pay-per-click, you're paying for the ad spend. You're paying to create and execute the ad as well. So knowing those things and being able to show up while you're working on your SEO positioning is a good strategy. Okay, social media. Social media has been a big buzzword for a long time now, well over a decade. Now you have two different facets of social media. You have your organic social media, as I like to call it, which is your day-to-day or week-to-week posting. Whatever your cadence and your timeline for posting on social media is, that your audience, your already built-in friends, fans, audience is going to see. Now, then you have a paid spend allocation. All the platforms work differently. So similar to the pay-per-click allocation, you set up and spend, let's say you're going to spend $750 a month to show up on ads to acquire new users and get them to convert. Very similar to the pay-per-click, having your messaging in place, knowing what you want to bid on and what kind of audience you want is important. Again, each one of these platforms works slightly different in terms of their ad backend. And also knowing what audience you want to get or convey. I use Facebook because as a lawn care expert, I know homeowners between the ages of 35 to, let's say, 65 who have a busy lifestyle and don't have time to mow the lawn are going to be on Facebook. So I'm going to set up my ads on that platform as opposed to something like a Snapchat, a TikTok, which has a younger audience, right? Or I am Active Web Group, a full-service digital marketing firm in Hauppauge, New York. I am going to set up ads on LinkedIn because that's where decision makers are. Marketing directors and team leaders exist in the marketplace. So knowing where to advertise on these social media platforms or channels is important. I always say, again, I'm going to repeat myself, but don't have 10 different platforms. I'm going to be on Snapchat and Pinterest and all these platforms, Twitter, and then just don't execute them to 100%. If you're going to want to do it, take a couple platforms that you know you could be successful at and automate that process. Okay, issues. There's always issues in terms of life, but digital marketing is the same way. There are things that happen and things that change over time in the digital frontier. And to be aware of these things, one as a professional digital marketer, that's obviously vital, but as a business owner, it's vital too, because things come up, as always, with a business that you want to be aware of. Okay, so site speed. We talked a lot about a great website and having a great website. A lot to unpack there, but site speed is important. The first reason, again, is if I have a slow site, and I'm sure you guys have all been super slow websites, you get frustrated and bored after a couple seconds and you X out, you're done, and you go on to the next competitor. So knowing what your site speed is and how fast your website is in various search engines and on various devices is important. If I have a lot of video content on the front page of my website, Google is not going to like that. Your end user, they might engage with it, but also it might slow down and bog down your website. So knowing how a user is going to engage in your website and having understanding what your bounce rate is important. SEO has a heavy impact and correlation with site speed. Google has a mobile first index, so they consider your website first on a mobile device. If your website has, again, a lot of videos, heavy images, Google is going to say, this is not a mobile-friendly website. It's very slow. It's going to be harder for you to rank ahead of your competition if they have a better optimized site on a mobile device. So knowing this is important. Okay, so we talked a little bit about websites as well earlier, but I want to dive a little deeper here. So you have two different kinds of websites. You have a responsive versus an adaptive website. I'm showing two different examples here. So a responsive website is something that conforms to a device. So if you look here to my left, I have that CTA button that's orange. It might say click here, call now, get started, free trial. That still exists, and all the elements still exist on the website, right? Regardless of the mobile device. However, all it's doing is it's conforming to that. So I still get the elements. These three elements are probably below the fold here, below the scroll, but everything is still there. Whereas with an adaptive website is I'm stripping out data or information based on the user device. So for example, here, I have these three elements. However, if you look on this tablet versus this tablet, I'm getting rid of some elements because it's not important to a user who is working from that device. The same is true with the mobile device. I'm stripping out certain elements that might not be important. I'm boiling it down to its most important elements for the user based on device. Okay, AMP is another one. AMP does essentially what I just described earlier in the last slide. They are a adaptive platform. So Google AMP is a product that what it does is it bridges the gap and it helps that mobile first, that mobile friendly initiative. It essentially turns your website on the mobile device into more of a, I don't want to call it a Word document, but it strips out all that information for you that isn't relevant. So this way a user could interact with your website and it's as fast as humanly possible. Of course, this is a Google product, and with it being a Google product and service, Google's going to like it. So if you have a bunch of AMP pages on your website, maybe you're doing the top 5 web pages we talked about earlier. If you're doing this, this is a good way for Google to give you a thumbs up and rank you ahead. Okay, the best approach here, as I said, with all this stuff is ask questions. Ask yourself, okay, so what is my business strategy? Who is my customer? Who's the end user? Is the end user for Active Web Group, is it a marketing director or a decision maker? Or am I B2C? Is it I'm selling t-shirts to somebody? I have a lawn care service that I'm looking for a homeowner who's B2C. Knowing your end user is important, and knowing what channels and what things a user might hang up on based on that is important. So on the B2C side, if I know that I am going to have a lot of users visit on a mobile device, I want to consider the stuff I said earlier about AMP, Google AMP, having a Google AMP optimized website. Make sure my website is prim and proper on a mobile device, because that's where a lot of my users are going to come from. Whereas if I have a B2B website, like let's take activewebgroup.com, I'm probably going to have a lot of users that visit my website from a desktop 9 to 5. So I want to consider things like having important CTAs, what they look like on a desktop computer. That stuff is important. And then when you take that journey and you apply it to digital marketing as a whole, you can then start to define your path. So on Active Web Group side, being B2B, if I am going to run a digital marketing ad, a pay-per-click ad, I might want to show up 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. There's no reason for me to run an ad Saturday afternoon, right? The person who's going to interact and engage with my ad isn't in the office, more than likely. So knowing those things is important. Okay, Google algorithm updates. What I mean by this is Google all the time is putting out updates to the way they rank and position things. So they're doing this, behind the scenes. It's not information that's readily available. They don't say, that's it, we're posting a thing today. There's a lot of talk and speculation behind it within my industry. But they post and update things all the time that changes your ranking position. So having an expert here who knows what's going on and how to get out of it is important. Let's say my landscaping company, I was ranking number 2 for lawn care, but I didn't meet a couple of new criteria on my website that Google changed. So I got deranked and I ended up on page 15. And all of a sudden I had a big drop in traffic. That is important to know, and how to get out of that is important to know. This is a good example of some algorithms that were released a year or so ago. Every year they give these things, names. And then this shows you the drop in traffic and position that happened. This is a good example of a client we had. So they were ranking great. They got a lot of visitors to the site, but then they saw a tremendous spike in drop off. And you can see this in e-commerce goals. So having all of a sudden, I went from getting 500 products sold a day to 20. We've seen things like that happen. To I used to have 5,000 people visit my site a month. Now I only have 1,000. So being able to understand and diagnose what happened and figuring out how to get out of it is important. But when you see anomalies or dips in traffic, that could be an algorithm update. Okay, ADA. We're jumping around between web and marketing here, but ADA is your hearing and visually impaired initiative on your website. So having a website that speaks to people with certain disorders is important. What's going on right now is you're having a lot of people getting sued randomly because they don't have a website that meets certain criteria based on the ADA. So a lot of that could be contrast ratios of images versus words, or your text isn't readable or highlightable. So that can't be read by one of these readers that read to the hearing or visually impaired user. So having a website that's accessible, similar to putting a ramp on the front of your building, is important. This explains the overview of compliance levels. Most websites tend to fall in the middle, but it really does depend on your traffic or where your audience comes from. And the California Website Privacy Law Act. So this is a big one as well. You're starting to see a lot of websites ask you and tell you, hey, I'm storing your data, or this is what I do with your data. Do you consent? You have to click yes before you can go to the website. Having that on there is important. Same as the ADA, a lot of people are getting sued over this. And a lot of the interaction levels with your website are different. So depending on how many users visit your website, what kind of website you are, do you do X amount of business in, let's say, the state of California, that stuff matters and could get you into trouble. So knowing a bit about this law and being able to put a quick fix there with that consent form is a big deal. Okay, and the last thing I want to say is things like emerging technology is important to look at in terms of digital marketing. So you consider one of those speak rights. I don't want to say her name because I got a bunch of them around me, but the Amazon A girl, she's a search, she's a search tool essentially. So she is an organic search tool. She's searching the web based on what I'm dictating to her. So these are long tail terms. A lot of people speak phonetically to them. So understanding that and understanding what the dictation might be based on that is important. And then putting a spend allocation or a SEO strategy in place for that. So having your small key terms, which might just be one or two words as your short term, and then having your longer tail key terms, which would be maybe how I would speak to my speak assistant and search the web. So having both those things in place and knowing what the rank reports look like there is important.